2 out of 3 sessions so far. How are you feeling? Energy's good? You feeling stimulated? We're watching in the back, so I'm with you, chomping popcorn, making notes, and loving it. We've got our last one before our break at 3:30, just to sort of manage your expectations. Lou visits, caffeination, water, gossip await you very soon. But before that, we have saved the best for last. As usual, I would love to welcome Tom Lloyd, RDI, from Pearson Lloyd to the stage. He's going to outline how he's woven sustainability into every aspect of their work. Please join me in welcoming Tom.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for coming. I'm sure I know a few faces in the audience, so cheer at the end. My name is Tom Lloyd, and I'm hoping that works. I'm here to speak on behalf of Pearson Lloyd, which is the design studio that I founded with Luke Pearson, my partner, 28 years ago in 1997. We are an industrial design studio based in East London, about 10 or 12 people currently. Our primary practice is product design, industrial design, but we also move into spaces and services. We design for the public sector, for the private sector, but our focus is design for manufacture. And I want to talk to you about, not as specialist sustainability designers, but as just practitioners, and how we have sort of gone on a journey in the last decade or so towards a practice that is more in tune with planet, and sort of rebalancing and reshaping how we behave with our clients and also within the industry. I want to start back here in 2017. This is the studio buildings that we purchased in 2017, a rundown run of dilapidated workshops. There's a bit of Victorian in there, tucked away, and some 1980s factory units. And the story of the development of that is kind of symptomatic of the change of approach that we've been going through, where we've been trying to rebalance the sort of pure economic interests of our relationships with our clients with a more open dialogue and a more open kind of conversation with ourselves, with our clients, with our users, and with the industry. I just want to sort of, actually, before I get into that, reflecting on the Dieter Rams Award this morning, I think Luke and I have always felt quite aligned to the principles that he might espouse around material efficiency, pragmatism, longevity. And we've also been very interested in the user and understanding how we can improve people's lives. And I think that, in fact, I think it was a Design Council report from a couple of years ago that really made me think how the focus on the user has been at the expense of nature. And that's stuck with me ever since. And how do we, for 30 years, we've been imagining that user-centered design is kind of like an angelic position, that if you do that, you're doing good in the world. And if you're rational and pragmatic with the way you use resources, you're also doing good in the world. But I think we've all had to realize that we've had to be much more ambitious about our practice and much more ambitious about the resources we use and the systems that we engage in and the cultures that we sort of espouse. So coming back to this, after we purchased the building, we employed a great architect in London, and we spent about 18 months developing a concept. And the concept at that time was really about, we've bought an asset, how do we maximize the asset? And this was some of the sort of pre-planning drawings that we got to towards the end of this particular project, part of the project. And even the word asset makes me kind of, my skin slightly crawl, because I think it's a symptom of how we've behaved as capitalists and of people who are used to being productive all the time, is how do you sweat? How do you get the most out of something? And we, this had a basement and 3 floors, and we squeezed in and we cut back to the rights of light, and we did all sorts of things to kind of, in theory, we were doing a really good job. We were trying to enhance our investment and make a lovely project out of it. Luckily, Luke and I, it's almost simultaneously, had a change of heart, and we rewrote the brief, and we thought, if we put planet sort of back in as a key stakeholder in that conversation, would the project look different? And we realized that it would. And we ended up going through a sort of retrofit process where we literally peeled away this plaster off the walls. And it was a process of discovery because we didn't really know what we'd even bought, to be honest. It was a very full workshop full of fine art frame makers, and we kind of couldn't really see it. And so we literally had to peel back the materials and uncover what we had bought, and then slowly put it back and slowly recreate it. And this is that's the same elevation from the 2 slides ago. And it's a lovely project, and we're very proud of it. And we're very lucky that we could afford to do that in East London. And you can see on the left is the Victorian part. There's a little central area which is new, and then on the right is the old 1980s building. And we really, really, really worked hard to minimize the interventions, take care of the materials. And we also, as a design studio, and I think a lot of design studios are quite introverted, we tend to think about what we're doing in relation to our clients and those relationships. And by creating this space, we've been very fortunate to become a slightly more sort of open-hearted organization. We host in a particular way, and we've actually built a gallery, which is a key part of what I want to talk to you about today, or one part, on the bottom left-hand corner, which has sort of become a sort of community asset for us, where we've allowed a sort of liminal space to emerge, where creative sectors of all types have been welcomed into that space and have used it as a space for conversation and for presentation. What's amazing is this building is 66% less embodied carbon than the new build we were going to put back. So one of the things I want to end with in a few minutes later is this idea of brief building. How do you write a good brief for the planet? And I think the rewriting of the brief of this project enabled us to create a great project as a workspace, but also to have a particular impact in terms of carbon and circularity. A lot of people have talked about palimpsest for this project, which is the kind of layering of one text over the other. And there's also a richness about the fact that this part of Hackney was a Russian Jewish timber trade heritage for the last, in the 19th century, 18th, 19th century. And so it's the wood trades that were there and precious. And we unearthed the censers from 1880. There's doll makers, and there's fancy trimmers, and there's hat finishers and boot finishers, and there's all these trades that in a funny way we've relearnt, we've rediscovered through the process of that project. Okay, moving on. This is a project called Homer. We designed for Knoll, which is a furniture brand in 1997 in our first year. And I want to give it, it's a bit of way of creating a bit of context on the work that we've been doing in the last decade. This was, you can see from the Apple laptop that it's just at the beginning of sort of mobile personal devices. This was also at the beginning of hot desking. We were incredibly proud of this little baby. But when I look back at it, I realize it's made of about 12 different materials. It's effectively a sort of intense composite. And also, for those of you who are old enough, we used to talk about invisible fixings. We used to celebrate the fact that you couldn't see how it had been put together. And we really realize now that if you can't understand how something is assembled, you're never going to understand how it's disassembled. So circularity is rewriting the rules of engagement, if you like, of how we make things. And this product just wouldn't be on our drawing boards or however we create today, because it sort of reflects so many cultures that we have to let go. I live opposite some railway arches in Hackney, and I witness the discarding of furniture on a weekly basis under the arch right in front of our house. And I've started taking photographs as a sort of photographic record of that. And the furniture sector which we are in is highly problematic in terms of material consumption and circularity. This product, it might be a bit grubby. You might not like the look of it, but actually most of the materials are perfectly functional, and yet it has become redundant. It's either become culturally redundant because someone doesn't need or want it anymore, and unfortunately, council recycling systems don't take in bulky waste like furniture. So we've got a problem, and that's a particular interest of ours, about how do we create new types of structure that supports a sort of slightly more planet optimistic and planet friendly culture. This is an image I found from the Sunday Times from the 1969, I think, under some stairs about 6 months ago. And I kind of laugh whenever I see it, because I wonder whether my dad would dress like that when he was 40 in 1969. But there's a truth behind it around trend. And unfortunately, capitalism and consumption and capitalism go hand in hand. And trend is a sort of agent of consumption, because by creating obsolescence, cultural obsolescence, we're encouraging new purchases. Obviously, very, very few of us would dress like this today. And unfortunately, we're all in this culture of what's the new colour of this year, or what's the new shape, what's the new cut of my trousers. Suddenly I'm wearing baggy trousers, whereas a year ago I might have been wearing something else. I'm just a victim of that same culture. But it's something that we really have to understand in terms of who we design for and how we design. And there's a contradiction between creating work that's timeless, like a Vitsu shelving system, and timely, i.e. how can it be relevant to today's needs? Just to finish on the fashion thing, this was a few photos taken in a market in East London in about 10 minutes, and I realised that this dusty pink, I've got a thing about dusty pink, and I realised that sort of 20% of the people on this market were all wearing the same colour. And they didn't think they were a victim of fashion, because they were 10-year-olds up to 80-year-olds wearing the same colour. But of course, as our colour view changes, this becomes culturally redundant. And so it's not only about building systems, it's about really acknowledging the sort of how and why we're, as consumers as well as creators, this is something we really have to understand. So we have various ways of internally in the studio understanding the transition, and this is 2 or 3 slides that represent that. You know, most of what we do as an industrial culture globally is an extraction followed by discarding of materials. In principle, in the last decade or two, we have been designing in a cradle-to-cradle way. We've been designing for recycling, in other words, enabling the reclaimment of materials, but we're mostly still using extractive materials. And I suppose the future is where we start to really understand how we design with waste streams, and but also enable that reclamation. So we have to, and for us as industrial designers, we can't do that at the end of the project, especially with certain materials like aluminium. You have to know you're designing with recycled aluminium at the beginning of the project, because it has certain mechanical properties that you can't detail with in a particular way. So understanding how, again, we write a brief that enables a sort of planet positive response is a critical part of kind of what we think about on a daily basis. So 2023, we showed an exhibition called Material Change. It was at Material Matters Fair at the Barge House. And it was we literally dissected about 6 or 8 or 10 of our projects and tried to identify the decisions we'd made through material selection and construction that could be seen as sort of benchmarks of planet positivity. Each project isn't a sort of bullseye, because sometimes you just try and tackle one good part of the system, but they each also reflect very small decisions we can all make to have an impact in terms of whether it's carbon or whether it's circularity, which are 2 foundations of us as industrial designers that we spend a lot of time thinking about. So I'm just going to flick through some of that, and you'll see 2 or 3 bits of our work. This is a chair for a Danish company called How. It was designed actually about 12 years ago, and it's just a classic stacking chair. It's in polypropylene. But at the beginning of the project, we agreed with the client that we wouldn't put any glass fiber into the molding. Now, often, glasses and other strengtheners and carbon are used in the molding process to strengthen the plastic. It's actually a little bit lazy, because the more glass you put in, the stronger the molding gets. and you have to think less about the engineering in terms of the true forms or systems of the plastic. This particular product is 100% polypropylene, no glass, and it was actually all the curves that you can see on that right-hand image are simply a reflection of us trying to create stiffness through the form of the design. So again, it was by choosing to make that decision at the beginning of the project, it actually reflected the ergonomics and the practical engineering of the product and the look of the product. So again, they can go hand in hand in a very interesting way. For the exhibition, we did some work with Chimera, which is a 3D knitting company in Nottingham, where we tried to create some tensile structures using wooden dowel and polyester knit, just as an experiment to sort of talk about efficiency. Efficiency, again, is a very old-fashioned idea, but it's one that we can still be at the foundation of smart design, smart thinking. Next. We've also done some work about pulling polyurethane out of our designs. Polyurethane is not a particularly good material for the planet. It's a thermoset, which means it's very difficult to recycle. It's more or less a single-use material. It's actually very affordable, which is also a problem, because it means it's very difficult to replace. This replacement, which we did with Modus, is using coil springs, Cocolux, which is coconut and latex, and needled wool. It's about 10 or 15% more expensive than polyurethane. And it has its own supply chain and material and ESG issues around where you source your coconut. But it's interesting that this is, apart from the fact that the coconut would have been horsehair 100 years ago, sometimes we have to go back to understand how we might behave in the future in a positive way. And there's that, we are constantly trying to challenge ourselves about what material choices we're making and what constructional choices we're making in the work that we do. We also are producing furniture which is kind of a price range which is mass market, so that we can't be too experimental with what we do. We have to create work that is functional, that's attractive, and we're still sitting in an economic kind of paradigm where commerce is still a part of all we do. We all pay our mortgages through earning a living from someone, and that exchange of goods and services is still something very much that we are a part of. This is a project for Tact, which is a startup from Denmark, 2019, where they more or less flat pack, but it was in a way packaging flat pack as a sort of consumer purchasing culture with online sales. By sending it out flat pack, it's about 80% more efficient in terms of its transport volume, which, as Tom said earlier, is a big part of the carbon cost of a product. And again, the brief demanded it was the brief that wrote the creative response, and it's called the cross chair because you can just about see that the two frames slot together like a wine box to make the frame. So all the things came out of what was the intent at the beginning of the project. Oh, I've only got 10 minutes. I'll rattle through these last few ones here. Longevity, again, a simple idea. This is city benching for the city of Bath. And this is cast bronze and timber slats, borrowed again from the Victorians. But the interesting thing in here is there's zero refinishing. So unlike mild steel, which is cheaper, you have to finish it and you have to refinish it. And we actually we got some funding to commission the University of West of England to do a sort of life cycle analysis on the cost of refinishing over a 20-year cycle. And even though these benches are expensive because of the bronze, they're way cheaper in terms of that overall, that life cycle. And again, zero maintenance, which means much more likely to sustain itself in the long term. These are about 12, 15 years old now. Slightly more complex project. This is some classical public seating for a Polish company called Profim. Most of this type of seating is plywood subframes with cut foam and upholstery stapled into place. It turns out that plywood is more or less a single-use material. It's got so much glue in it that it can't be reprocessed into a second and third life. It has to be burned. Very few second systems available for plywood. And we ended up molding a replacement in recycled expanded polypropylene, which, even though it's a fossil fuel-based material, it has higher credentials in terms of carbon and circularity. It's slightly lower in carbon, 6% than the plywood, amazingly. But it's 20% more recycled material and 70% more recyclable material. And once you get into the value chain of material reclamation, these numbers become very, very important. And this is a high capital investment project, but for the companies that can afford to put the money into tooling, very, very interesting and effective. Another project, again, attempting to reduce polyurethane. This is a seat back made of a knitted polyester over a steel frame. And again, testing, this is about 70% lower in carbon for that back component. A favorite of ours is a collaboration with Batchworks, which is a London 3D print startup. This is a range of desking accessories using recycled PLA, which is a bioplastic reclaimed from the fast food industry. Fascinating, just the benefits in terms of life cycle, zero hard tooling, no production waste, no minimum order quantities. It's all very practical stuff. Very little, minimized transport and warehousing, and about a 6 times reduction in CO2 on a like-for-like basis. So using different models of production and really testing those is a part, again, of how we're trying to behave in our design process. Data. We've realized that as designers, we all need to become much smarter as material scientists. We can't actually become material scientists, but we can become very aware of the carbon and circularity impacts of our choices. This is a diagram that represents the difference, the saving on recycled material to virgin material of most of the base materials that we use in our process. And some examples: the best aluminium is about 95% less in carbon than the best recycled aluminium is about 95% less carbon than the worst virgin aluminium. Steel is about 60% less, PP is about 70% less. But we need to make those judgments at the beginning of our projects, and we need to understand, in the past we used to hand over procurement to the procurement department. The basis of their decisions would be time, performance, and cost. And none of the carbon or circularity impacts would be written into their tender process. So simply those things weren't taken into account. So I think we need to become much more clear thinking about how we use materials and where we get them from, and become much more curious about those supply chains. Okay, rattling through. After material change, we did a project called Well Made, where rather than thinking about our own work, we asked, in 2024, we asked 60 different people from around the world, and we asked them a simple question: what does well made mean to you? And this wasn't a climate project particularly, although a lot of the responses were sort of climate responses, if you like. We had the exhibition in our gallery. This was, I'm just going to run through some of them for you in a minute, but this was the collection. It was ranging from craft to biomaterials to systems and services. It was a fascinating project. And what it really brought home to us was that every single thing around us, every decision we make, everything we touch and use — there is a big biro in there, and I'm holding one now — has an impact in terms of you can all judge whether it was well made and why you think it was well made. And even though we didn't curate it, so to speak, a lot of the thematics that we all understand to be current in our thinking emerged from this set of objects. I'm just going to flick through some. It's a Victorian bone-handled toothbrush, milk plough that we heard from this morning, a straw hat, fibre optic cable, which is more about communication, milk bottle, toilet, 3D printed shoe, OSB, engineering board, plastic bag. I'm going to come on to these in a minute, some of them. A Pringle case, which is kind of intriguing, because I didn't think a Pringle case could be seen to be something that was well made. But if you only want to send 4 Pringles with your child for their packed lunch, suddenly it becomes kind of really interesting. Big biro, moon cup, I'm going to talk about these in a sec. What's interesting is the everydayness of these objects. You suddenly start to have conversations with your mum or your sister or whoever about how that object was made, what was the observation that was used in order to make it, and why. This is a beautiful one. In Finland, there's a company that uses eggs as chocolate packaging. So they take the egg out and they pour the chocolate back in during Easter. So that's a sort of beautiful, beautiful bit of sort of circular thinking. Obviously, these are all clear objects that you can all begin to have a point of view on. Even just a cherished object. If we can design things that people cherish, that's good for the planet, because it means that they're more likely, that carbon becomes more effective over its lifespan. So a few just in detail. We also decided to photograph these objects in a very intense way with a macro lens, and it just actually changed our relationship with the materiality of it. This is the straw hat. Clearly, straw is a waste material from the food industry. This is a robotics for needling wool into to see whether you can effectively 3D print waste wool, because there's a huge amount of wool that's discarded in Europe now because of the use of polyesters. 3D printed shoe. The moon cup, which is both socially progressive and also materially progressive, because it reduces the material consumption of period products, but also reduces period poverty, which in different countries around the world is a massive impact on women's lives. Scrubbing brush from Japan. The metric system, this was Nick Foster's, which was a beautiful observation. It wasn't an object, it was just the system of understanding weights and measures allows us all to communicate in a particular way, in a common way, that allows exchange of goods and services over time. The milk round, this was my suggestion in the first exhibition, which was about a circular system of delivering milk from the fields to the cities by train and by electric milk float during the 20th century, and still going on today. And then the glass is recovered and taken back and reused. So systems have always, it's not a new thing, the idea of circular systems. Again, we heard from Rodrigo this morning, Nopla, seaweed polymers. The key, it's just a perfect bit of engineering, again, not to do with the planet, but it's just the smart observation of humanity. The plastic bag, this came from Mark Wilson, who's the editor of Fast Company in New York. And as he observed, the plastic bag in itself is a brilliant piece of engineering. It's just the human use of it which is the destructive part. So actually this is incredibly carbon efficient, but only if it's used more than once. So sometimes it's the relationship with the objects and the systems and services around them that we have to challenge, not always the object itself. Max Fraser chose the scaffolding clamp, I think more as a symbol of what it means to disassemble and reassemble. Jasper Morrison, the Rex potato peeler. I'm running out of time, so I'm going to race on. Coming back to our diagrams, we have to go from only 10% of materials are reclaimed globally at the moment. How do we flip that? Now, it's unlikely that we're going to flip it to 90. Can we find a balance? Can we also understand how biomaterials that come from the earth and return to the earth truly in a compostable way can have that contribution? And also, how can we begin to think about the shared economy rather than the owned economy, the commons economy, so that we can, again, reduce redundancy of our material world and increase the circularity of what we should all treasure. So to finish, from our perspective, it's all new. We have new skills, we have new types of advocacy, new conversations. We have to be very humble because we don't know all the answers and we're trying to figure it out every day. What we think is right this year is probably not going to be right next year. Oops. New briefs, different types of decisions and different values. The hierarchy of our value proposition needs to change in order to become an ally of the planet. And to finish with, I want to come back to, this is a snapshot of some of the exhibitions we've had in the last 3 years in the gallery at Yorkton. And we've had about 100 events. And it's just an extraordinarily open place for conversation, from Central School of Art, Art Refuge Charities, Design Declares, Green Grads, Barbara Chandler, Royal Designers. There's music, food, lots of creative. There's a chess club that's emerged. And I think we all need to sort of talk more. And this is something that we've been lucky enough to encourage through that building. And it's one thing, and I think this 2-day conference should be celebrated for the power to convene people and the power to bring us all together. Thank you very much.
Was that? We've had the best afternoon. You now get a break, well deserved. Please go refresh yourselves, talk amongst yourselves, etc. And be back here promptly at 4 because we've got an absolute powerhouse end of the day for you. So we'll look forward to seeing you then. Take care.